Hey guys, tonight we're stepping into one of the most delicate social battlefields of the 20th century, the suburban dinner party of the 1950s housewife. Not the cheerful sitcom version where everyone laughs politely over a roast and a jello mold. I mean the real thing. The world of spotless kitchens, terrifying etiquette books, suspiciously perfect deviled eggs, and the quiet, unspoken fear that if your pot roast is even slightly dry, the neighbours might whisper about it for the next 12 years. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if this topic was your suggestion, thank you for sharing it. I always appreciate the ideas you bring to the channel. Feel free to leave a comment telling me where you're listening from and what time it is for you. It's always fun seeing who else is awake out there while the rest of the world sleeps. Because tonight, we're going back to a time when hosting dinner wasn't just cooking food. It was a full-scale domestic performance. Have you ever wondered what it was actually like to host a dinner party as a 1950s housewife? What happened if your husband's boss came over and your gravy separated? Were you allowed to sit down during the meal, or did you orbit the table like a polite domestic satellite? How many forks were you supposed to set out before someone assumed you were raised by wolves? What if the jello salad collapsed into something that looked less like a recipe and more like a science experiment? Were guests silently judging the shine on your floor, the crispness of your napkins, or the psychological stability of your meatloaf? And perhaps the most important question of all, could you survive an entire evening smiling politely while balancing a tray of cocktails, pretending everything is effortless, and desperately hoping no one notices the casserole that's currently burning in the oven? Well, congratulations. You've just woken up in a quiet American suburb. The year is 1955. Your house smells faintly of furniture polish. The neighbours are watching everything. Your husband just invited 4 co-workers to dinner tonight, and you have exactly 6 hours to become the perfect hostess. Good luck. It usually begins with a sentence so casual it feels almost harmless. Your husband walks through the door around 5:30 p.m, loosens his tie, and casually mentions that he invited the boss and his wife over for dinner tomorrow night. Or worse, tonight. Suddenly your peaceful afternoon of laundry and vacuuming has transformed into a high-stakes social event, where the reputation of your household, your husband's career, and possibly the future of Western civilization now rests on whether you can produce a flawless roast. For a moment, you simply stare at him, not because you didn't hear the words, but because your brain is attempting to calculate how many hours exist between now and the moment the doorbell rings. Dinner with the boss is not the same as dinner with friends. Friends will forgive slightly lumpy mashed potatoes. Friends might even laugh if the gravy looks like something that escaped a chemistry lab. The boss, however, exists in a different category entirely. The boss represents promotions, raises, job security, office politics. And tonight, for reasons nobody fully understands, all of that power is about to sit in your dining room and politely chew whatever you put on a plate. Your husband, meanwhile, has already moved on from the announcement. He's opening the newspaper, loosening his shoes, completely unaware that he has just launched a 6-hour domestic marathon. Let's talk about the planning. First, the menu must be decided immediately. In 1950s America, the safest option is usually a roast. Roast beef if you want to look impressive. Roast chicken if the grocery store situation looks grim. Ham if you want something forgiving that won't punish you for blinking at the wrong moment. Whatever you choose must accomplish 3 things. It must taste good. It must look impressive. And most importantly, it must not betray you. Because a roast that dries out is not just dinner failure, it's social catastrophe. Now your brain begins running through the pantry like a frantic inventory clerk. Do you have potatoes, carrots, butter? Is there enough flour for gravy? You open cabinets with increasing urgency, discovering mysterious cans of soup from 1953 and exactly half the ingredients you need. This means one thing. You must go to the grocery store. But before that, there is another realization creeping slowly into your mind. The house. The house must look perfect. Not mostly clean. Not good enough for company. Perfect. Dinner parties in the 1950s function a little like domestic theatre. Guests don't just arrive to eat food. They arrive to quietly observe how the household operates. The shine of the floors, the neatness of the table, the crispness of the napkins. Somewhere deep in the cultural rulebook of mid-century America is an unspoken belief that the state of your living room reflects the moral strength of the entire family. No pressure. So the next few hours begin unfolding like a carefully choreographed storm. You vacuum again, even though you vacuumed this morning. You polish the coffee table until you can see your reflection, looking mildly concerned about the roast situation. Couch pillows are fluffed with the intensity of someone preparing them for a magazine photo shoot. Meanwhile, the clock keeps moving. Tick, tick, tick. Dinner with the boss is approaching with the steady determination of a slow-moving train. At some point, your husband wanders into the kitchen and asks a dangerous question. "So what are we having?" You pause for a moment, holding a potato like it personally betrayed you. Because explaining the complexity of this situation would require a full lecture on mid-century social etiquette, gender roles, and the delicate balance between gravy thickness and career advancement. Instead, you smile politely. "Roast beef, you say." He nods approvingly, completely unaware that you're now engaged in a high-stakes domestic performance that involves timing, presentation, social grace, and at least 4 separate burners on the stove. And the best part, when the doorbell rings later tonight, everything must look effortless, as if the evening simply happened, as if you didn't spend the entire afternoon sprinting between the kitchen, the living room, and the grocery store like a very determined domestic Olympic athlete. Welcome to hosting dinner in 1955. The roast is now your responsibility, and history is watching. Before a single carrot is chopped, the house itself must pass inspection. Every surface needs to shine with the enthusiasm of a toothpaste commercial. Floors must gleam, pillows must sit upright like obedient soldiers, and any evidence that human beings actually live here must disappear. Dinner parties in the 1950s weren't just about food. They were silent competitions in domestic perfection. Let's start with the living room. This is the stage where the evening begins, which means it must look less like a place where people actually relax, and more like a magazine advertisement for the American dream. The couch cushions must be fluffed, not casually fluffed, carefully fluffed, the kind of fluffing that suggests nobody has ever slouched there while eating potato chips. Coffee tables must be polished until they reflect light like a calm lake at sunset. Any stray magazines need to be stacked neatly, preferably the respectable kind. Nothing alarming. Certainly nothing that might suggest your household occasionally enjoys comic books or mildly scandalous movie gossip. And then there are the floors. You vacuum them once. Then, just to be safe, you vacuum them again. Because somewhere in the universe exists the horrifying possibility that the boss's wife might glance downward and see a crumb. The crumb must not exist. Now let's talk about the kitchen. The kitchen will eventually become the centre of the evening's chaos, but right now it must appear serene. Countertops wiped, sink empty, dish towels folded with the quiet dignity of ceremonial flags. If a guest wanders into the kitchen later, and guests always wander into the kitchen, you want them to see a space that looks calm and capable. Not the culinary battlefield it will become in approximately 45 minutes. Next comes the dining room. This room is where the real test of civilization occurs. The tablecloth must be perfectly smooth. Wrinkles suggest carelessness, which in 1950s etiquette circles is only slightly less scandalous than serving cold potatoes. Chairs are positioned just so. Centerpieces are arranged with tasteful precision, nothing too extravagant. This is dinner with the boss, not the coronation of a European monarch. But it must look thoughtful, intentional, as if the flowers simply arrange themselves that way out of respect for your excellent hosting abilities. Now pause for a moment and imagine something. You're standing in the middle of your house. Everything is spotless. The living room glows with polished furniture. The dining table waits patiently like a well-trained student ready for an exam. Even the hallway looks suspiciously dignified. And yet your brain whispers a dangerous thought. What if they notice something? What if the boss's wife opens a door and discovers the one closet where every slightly embarrassing object in your house has been shoved with great urgency? Because this is another secret of 1950s hosting. The closet of denial. Every home has one. It contains shoes, magazines, sweaters, possibly a board game that lost half its pieces sometime during the Eisenhower administration. But tonight the closet remains closed. The door must never open. Because perfection is not about having a flawless home. It's about creating the illusion that everything is always this neat. Eventually you step back and admire your work. The house looks impressive, orderly, peaceful. Of course, in roughly 1 hour the kitchen will fill with sizzling pans, boiling potatoes, and a gravy situation that requires constant supervision. But for now the house stands ready, shining, waiting. And somewhere deep inside the quiet living room, the couch cushions sit upright, still pretending nobody has ever taken a nap on them. Choosing the dinner menu isn't casual. It's a strategic maneuver involving cookbooks, reputation, and quiet panic. The ideal meal must look impressive but not extravagant, elegant but not experimental. Something safe like roast beef or baked ham is often the safest bet, because if the boss chokes on a new casserole invention involving pineapple and tuna, your husband's promotion might quietly vanish. So you sit down with the cookbook, not just any cookbook, the serious one, the thick, respectable volume that promises dependable meals and contains recipes written in the confident tone of someone who has never accidentally burned a pie. You flip through the pages slowly, evaluating your options like a general reviewing battle plans. Roast chicken, respectable but slightly ordinary. Ham, reliable but maybe a little too casual if the boss is important enough. Roast beef, though roast beef has dignity. Roast beef says, this household understands responsibility. Roast beef it is. Now the supporting cast must be chosen carefully, because a 1950s dinner plate is a delicate ecosystem. Everything must complement the roast, while maintaining the illusion that you effortlessly prepared an elegant spread without collapsing from stress. First, potatoes. Mashed potatoes are usually the safest choice. They're comforting, traditional, and unlikely to surprise anyone. You imagine the boss politely scooping them onto his plate while nodding approvingly at your husband. But mashed potatoes come with risks. Too thick, and they resemble plaster. Too thin, and they resemble soup. The margin for error is narrow. Next come the vegetables. Carrots are excellent candidates. Carrots are colourful, polite, and rarely controversial. Nobody has ever leaned back from a dinner table and declared carrots to be socially alarming. Green beans are another possibility, especially if you serve them with a little butter and maybe a handful of almonds, which immediately elevates the dish into something that feels almost luxurious. But vegetables must never dominate the plate. Remember, this is a roast beef operation. Everything else exists in quiet support of the main attraction. Now we must address something important. The casserole. Casseroles in the 1950s are extremely popular. Entire cookbooks are devoted to them, many involving enthusiastic combinations of canned soup, noodles, and ingredients that seem to have met only moments before entering the oven. Some of them are excellent, others are ambitious. Tonight is not the night for ambition. You glance briefly at a recipe involving tuna, gelatin and olives, before quietly closing the page like someone sealing away a dangerous secret. No, tonight we remain traditional. Roast beef, potatoes, vegetables, simple, respectable, stable. Now comes the matter of gravy. Gravy is the quiet hero of the entire meal. Good gravy transforms a dinner into something memorable. Bad gravy transforms a dinner into a story people tell later with raised eyebrows and cautious laughter. You mentally rehearse the process already. Drippings from the roast, a little flour, slow whisking. The whisk must never stop. Because gravy has a mysterious ability to develop lumps the moment your attention wanders. Finally, dessert must be selected. Dessert is important, but it must not overshadow the dinner itself. A pie is usually the safest choice. Apple pie, if you want something dependable. Perhaps lemon meringue if you're feeling slightly adventurous. Cake is another possibility. But pie has tradition. Pie has authority. Pie quietly assures everyone at the table that this household respects the natural order of things. You close the cookbook and take a deep breath. The menu is decided. Roast beef, mashed potatoes, buttered carrots, gravy, pie. It looks simple on paper, but in a few hours this menu will become an intricate dance of oven temperatures, boiling pots, and careful timing. Because everything must arrive at the table warm. Everything must taste balanced. And above all, everything must appear effortless. As if meals like this simply happen in your kitchen every evening. Which of course they absolutely do not. But that's part of the performance. Welcome to dinner planning in 1955. The operation has officially begun. No 1950s dinner table feels complete without a gelatin creation that defies both gravity and logic. Inside this shimmering mound might be fruit, vegetables, mayonnaise, shrimp, or occasionally all of them at once. These jello salads are less about taste and more about proving you own several interesting molds. Let's talk about gelatin for a moment. In the 1950s, gelatin isn't just a dessert, it's a lifestyle. Entire cookbooks are dedicated to it, filled with cheerful photographs of wobbling towers that look like edible stained glass windows. And tonight, you must decide whether you're brave enough to attempt one. You stand in the kitchen staring at the jello box like it contains ancient secrets. Strawberry? Lime? Orange? Each flavour holds possibilities, and some of those possibilities are concerning. Because somewhere in your cookbook exists a recipe involving lime gelatin, shredded carrots, and something called salad dressing, which is a polite mid-century phrase for mayonnaise. You pause. You imagine the boss lifting a spoonful of carrot mayonnaise gelatin toward his mouth, while maintaining a polite expression that says, "I support innovation, but I'm also confused." Perhaps tonight is not the night for mayonnaise gelatin, but gelatin must appear somewhere. It's practically required. By the 1950s, jello has become a symbol of modern cooking. Bright, colourful, efficient, and slightly mysterious. Part of the excitement is the mould. You open the cabinet and pull out the special one, the decorative ring-shaped mould that transforms ordinary gelatin into something that looks like a small architectural project. Without a mould, gelatin is just gelatin. With a mould, it becomes a centerpiece. Now begins the preparation. First, the boiling water. The powder dissolves slowly, turning the bowl into a glowing liquid jewel. You stir carefully, watching. The mixture swirl like a tiny sunset in the kitchen light. Next comes the important decision. What goes inside? Fruit is the safest choice. Pineapple chunks, maybe, or sliced peaches. Fruit makes sense. Fruit belongs in gelatin. But the cookbook whispers temptations. Cottage cheese, celery, shrimp. There is even a recipe involving olives. You stare at that page for a long moment, wondering which brave soul first looked at a bowl of lime gelatin and thought, "You know what this needs? Seafood." But tonight, wisdom prevails. You add fruit. Simple, harmless fruit that will not confuse anyone at the dinner table. The mixture is poured into the mould with the careful focus of someone handling a fragile science experiment. Because gelatin has rules. The fruit must not float awkwardly to the top. The colour must remain clear and cheerful, and most importantly, the entire thing must set properly. You slide the mould gently into the refrigerator. Now comes the waiting. Gelatin is patient. It refuses to rush. For the next few hours it will quietly transform from liquid to wobbling sculpture, preparing for its dramatic moment later tonight. But the true challenge arrives during serving, because removing gelatin from a mould is one of the great suspenseful moments of 1950s cooking. You fill a bowl with warm water and lower the mould carefully. Not too long, just enough to loosen the edges. Then you place a plate on top. Deep breath. Flip. For one terrifying second, nothing happens. You lift the mould slowly and there it is. A perfect ring of shimmering, fruit-studded gelatin, wobbling gently like a proud but slightly nervous dessert. Victory. You step back and admire it. It glows softly under the kitchen light, an edible monument to mid-century creativity. Does it make perfect culinary sense? Not entirely, but it looks impressive. And in the world of the 1950s dinner party, appearance is half the battle. Your gelatin masterpiece is ready. It will wobble, proudly beside the roast later tonight, quietly reminding everyone that modern American cooking has entered its most ambitious era. An era where apparently anything can become salad as long as it jiggles. Before dinner even begins, there is the ritual of cocktails. Guests gather in the living room while drinks appear in delicate glasses balanced on a tray. The goal is to create an atmosphere of effortless sophistication, even if you secretly practiced carrying that tray 6 times earlier to avoid spilling whiskey on the rug. Let's set the scene. The doorbell rings. This is the official starting bell of the evening. You smooth your dress, glance quickly at the hallway mirror, and open the door with the calm confidence of someone who definitely did not sprint through the kitchen 5 minutes ago checking 3 separate burners. Your guests step inside with polite smiles and coats folded over their arms. The boss, dignified and slightly formal. His wife, observant in the quiet way people become when entering someone else's home. Your husband shakes hands enthusiastically. You offer warm greetings, accept coats, and guide everyone into the living room where the cocktail hour begins. Cocktails in the 1950s are not casual beverages. They're an entire social ritual, a gentle warm-up before dinner that allows conversation to loosen, while everyone pretends they are naturally this charming. Now comes the tray. Earlier this afternoon you practiced with it, walking slowly across the kitchen while balancing empty glasses like a circus performer, training for a very polite act. Because carrying a tray full of drinks requires a surprising amount of physics. The glasses are small but delicate. The liquid moves unpredictably. One wrong tilt and suddenly your living room carpet smells like a distillery, so you move carefully. The tray glides through the room while you offer drinks in a voice that sounds relaxed and friendly. Whiskey sour, martini, perhaps a highball? Cocktail culture in mid-century America is thriving. Offices close, men loosen their ties, and somewhere a bottle of gin quietly becomes the most important object in the room. Your husband pours drinks with cheerful enthusiasm. This is his territory now. The bar tray, the ice bucket, the tiny metal shaker that rattles with importance. Meanwhile, you observe the room. Conversation begins cautiously at first. The boss asks about the neighbourhood. His wife compliments the house in the careful tone that could mean either genuine admiration or polite social duty. Your husband laughs a little too loudly at something that wasn't especially funny, but that's normal. Cocktails exist precisely for this moment. They smooth the edges of social interactions. They turn strangers into conversationalists. Within minutes, the room begins to relax. The boss loosens slightly. His shoulders drop. His voice becomes warmer. His wife begins discussing travel plans or perhaps a recipe she recently tried that involved exactly 3 cans of soup and a surprising amount of cheese. You listen attentively, smiling and nodding while mentally checking the kitchen clock. Because while the living room enjoys its pleasant cocktail glow, the oven is still conducting a much more serious operation. The roast is cooking, potatoes are waiting, gravy preparation lurks in the near future like an important exam, but outwardly, none of this exists. Your job during cocktail hour is to create calm. You float gently through the room, refilling glasses, adjusting small details, keeping conversation flowing. It's a little like hosting a tiny social orchestra, where every instrument must stay in tune, and slowly, almost magically, the atmosphere changes. Laughter grows easier, stories begin appearing. Even the boss starts telling an amusing anecdote about the office printer or a recent business trip. This is the success of cocktail hour. It turns a formal dinner invitation into something warmer, something human. Soon you glance at the clock again. The roast is ready, which means the evening's about to move from the living room to the real stage of the night, the dining table. A 1950s hostess does not greet guests wearing flour-covered clothing and exhaustion. No, by the time the doorbell rings, you must somehow look fresh, elegant and composed, as if the kitchen didn't just resemble a battlefield 50 minutes earlier. This is one of the great illusions of mid-century hosting, because only moments before the guests arrive, you're not standing serenely by the door. You're moving through the kitchen like a very polite tornado. The roast is in the oven, the potatoes are peeled. Somewhere on the counter sits a bowl of carrots waiting patiently for their turn in the pot, and yet you must now stop everything, because the hostess must transform. You glance at the clock. The guests are arriving in 20 minutes. This is the moment where the domestic marathon pauses so you can perform the fastest wardrobe change in suburban history. First comes the apron removal. The apron has served you well. It has protected you from flour clouds, gravy splashes, and the mysterious physics of butter. But the apron cannot greet the boss, so it comes off. You hang it neatly on the kitchen hook like a soldier completing its duty. Now you rush upstairs. The house is quiet for a brief moment. The living room waits downstairs, already polished and prepared. But upstairs in the bedroom mirror you finally see the evidence of the afternoon. A small streak of flour on your sleeve, hair that has gradually escaped its careful arrangement, and the unmistakable look of someone who has been supervising 4 different cooking processes at once. This will not do. The 1950s hostess must appear calm, collected, slightly glamorous, so you change into your hostess dress. The hostess dress is a special category of clothing, not too formal, but elegant, enough to suggest that dinner parties simply happen in your home all the time. Often it has a fitted waist, a full skirt, and colours that look friendly under warm dining room lights. You smooth the fabric carefully, then comes the mirror inspection. Hair first. You adjust it gently, restoring the careful shape that survived most of the day, but clearly lost a few battles during potato preparation. A quick brush, a small adjustment, and suddenly it looks intentional again. Next comes makeup. Nothing dramatic, just enough to look polished, a touch of lipstick, perhaps a little powder. The goal is not transformation. The goal is the illusion that you've been this composed all afternoon. Meanwhile, downstairs, the kitchen quietly continues its work. The roast cooks slowly, the gelatin salad rests confidently in the refrigerator, and somewhere a pot of water waits for the vegetables. But for a moment, you pause. You take a deep breath. Because this transformation is not just about clothing. It's about stepping into the role, the hostess, the calm center of the evening. Guests will arrive in minutes, and when they step through the door, they should see someone who looks relaxed, welcoming, and completely in control of the evening. Not someone who spent the last 3 hours negotiating with a roast and a bag of potatoes. You slip on your shoes, you glance at the mirror one last time. The flower is gone, the dress is neat, you look composed. Then you head downstairs. Back in the kitchen, you check the oven quickly. The roast is behaving itself. Good. The potatoes can wait a few more minutes. You wipe the counter once more, even though it's already spotless. And then the doorbell rings. Right on time. You walk to the door with a calm smile, every step steady, every movement graceful. No one outside knows what the last 15 minutes looked like. They only see the finished version. The perfect hostess of 1955, fresh, elegant and welcoming, as if dinner simply prepared itself. The dinner table becomes a geometric puzzle of plates, forks, glasses and folded napkins. Each utensil has a specific location that etiquette books insist upon with the intensity of a legal contract. Place one fork incorrectly and somewhere an invisible etiquette instructor will sigh deeply. Let's begin with the plate. The plate sits at the center of the setting like the sun in a small solar system. Everything else must orbit it with perfect alignment. Too close to the edge of the table and the entire arrangement looks nervous. Too far inward and someone may spend the evening leaning forward like they're preparing for a fencing match. So you adjust the plate carefully. A small nudge to the left, a tiny shift forward. Perfect. Now come the forks. Forks live on the left side of the plate. This rule is treated with the seriousness of international law. The dinner fork sits closest to the plate, while the salad fork waits patiently beside it, slightly farther away. Why? Because guests will eat from the outside in. It's one of those rules everyone vaguely understands but secretly hopes someone else will demonstrate first. You pause for a moment, looking at the forks. They gleam politely under the dining room light, ready for action. Now we move to the knives. Knives belong on the right side of the plate, blades facing inward toward the food. This small detail is surprisingly important. Etiquette experts believe blades facing outward look aggressive, which is apparently not the mood one wants at a dinner party involving roast beef and polite conversation. Next comes the spoon. The spoon rests beside the knife, waiting for soup or perhaps dessert later. Like all the other utensils, it must sit straight and parallel to the others. Crooked silverware suggests chaos, and chaos has no place at a 1950s dinner table. Now, let's talk about glasses. The water glass sits above the knife, slightly to the right. The angle must feel natural but intentional, as though the glass simply drifted into its correct position out of respect for good manners. If you're feeling especially sophisticated, a second glass may appear nearby for wine. But tonight you keep things simple. Water will do just fine. Then comes the napkin. Napkins are folded with quiet determination. Not crumpled, not tossed casually onto the plate like a surrendered flag. They must look thoughtful. Some hostesses fold them into elegant triangles. Others create small rectangles with crisp edges. You attempt a fold that looks dignified without resembling complicated origami. After a few adjustments, the napkin sits peacefully beside the forks. You step back and examine the table. Everything looks balanced, orderly, like a small edible ceremony waiting to begin. But one more detail remains: the centerpiece. In the 1950s, centerpieces are meant to add charm without blocking conversation. A simple arrangement of flowers works beautifully. Nothing too tall. You don't want guests leaning sideways all evening trying to see one another through a jungle of roses. So the flowers sit low and friendly in the middle of the table. Now the entire scene comes together, the tablecloth smooth and bright, the plates centered like quiet invitations, the the silverware lined up with military precision. You walk slowly around the table, making tiny adjustments. A fork shifted slightly. A glass rotated just a touch. These details may seem small, but together they create the atmosphere of the evening. Guests may not consciously notice every placement, but they will feel the order, the calm, the sense that everything is prepared. Finally, you stop and look at the finished table. It's elegant in that modest mid-century way. Nothing flashy, nothing excessive, just careful attention to detail. Soon the chairs will fill, the roast will arrive, conversation will rise and fall like gentle waves around the table, but for now the dining room waits quietly, every fork in its place, every glass standing ready. And somewhere, that invisible etiquette instructor finally nods with approval. When the doorbell finally rings, time slows down. You smooth your dress, check the roast in the oven one last time, and prepare to greet guests with a calm smile that hides the fact you've been sprinting around the house for the last 4 hours. This is the moment every hostess secretly rehearses. All afternoon has been leading to this single sound, ding-dong. The house is ready. The table is set. The gelatin creation is resting in the refrigerator like a shimmering monument to mid-century optimism. But still there are checks to perform. You move through the kitchen one last time. The roast sits proudly in the oven, filling the room with a rich, savoury smell that suggests everything is under control. You lean down and peek through the little oven window, as if the roast might suddenly develop stage fright and refuse to cooperate. No, it looks good. Confident even. Next, the potatoes. Still waiting patiently on the counter, peeled and ready for their boiling water destiny. Timing will matter later, but for now, they remain calm. The gravy plan sits quietly in the back of your mind like a looming math exam. Then you look around the kitchen, counters wiped, pots arranged neatly, dish towels folded. This is important because guests sometimes wander into kitchens. They don't mean to inspect anything, but their eyes inevitably notice details. And tonight, those details must whisper one clear message. This household is completely in control. Now you take a breath, a deep one, because once the door opens, the performance begins. You step into the hallway. The house is quiet except for the gentle hum of the refrigerator and the faint ticking of the wall clock. The living room glows softly under the lamps, looking warm and welcoming like something out of a magazine. The doorbell rings again. Your husband appears behind you, already cheerful and ready to shake hands like a man who did not spend the entire afternoon negotiating with a roast. You reach the door. Your hand pauses on the handle for just a second. Not out of fear, more like the calm pause of someone stepping onto a stage. Then you open it. And there they are. The boss stands on the porch with a polite smile and a coat folded over his arm. His wife stands beside him, equally composed, already scanning the house with the subtle curiosity of someone entering a new social space. You greet them warmly. "Come in. We're so glad you could make it." Coats are taken, greetings exchanged, hands shaken. The living room quickly fills with small polite sounds, laughter, compliments about the house, observations about the weather. Lovely neighbourhood. What a charming home. Your husband launches into friendly conversation immediately, guiding the boss inside with enthusiastic energy. Meanwhile, you lead the boss's wife toward the living room, where the soft lamps and tidy furniture quietly reassure everyone that the evening will be comfortable. For a moment you glance around the room. Everything is working. The house feels welcoming. The conversation is beginning to flow. No one suspects that 15 minutes ago you were standing in the kitchen staring intensely at a pot of carrots, like they personally owed you money. And that is the secret of the dinner party. The guests see the calm. They see the polished living room, the elegant hostess, the relaxed atmosphere. What they don't see is the careful choreography that brought everything together. 4 hours of planning, 3 trips through the house checking details, 2 mental reminders about gravy, and 1 roast currently performing its most important role inside the oven. But for now, none of that matters, because the guests have arrived. The evening has officially begun, and somewhere in the kitchen, the roast continues cooking quietly, preparing for its own moment of truth. Even introductions follow strict etiquette rules. Names must be said clearly, titles acknowledged, and no one must feel awkward for even a second. The entire process resembles a delicate dance of politeness and memory. Now that everyone has stepped inside and coats have been politely collected, the next social challenge begins. The introductions. This may sound simple. After all, you might think adults are perfectly capable of saying hello to one another without assistance. But in the 1950s, introductions are a carefully choreographed ritual. There are rules, there is structure, there is a correct order that etiquette books explain with the seriousness of a legal contract. And tonight, you are the master of ceremonies. You guide everyone gently into the living room, where the lamps glow warmly and the couch cushions remain perfectly upright, still pretending they have never supported a human body. Your husband clears his throat slightly, ready to begin. But first you must remember the golden rule of introductions. The person of lower social standing is introduced to the person of higher standing, which means in this case, the boss is the gravitational center of the room. Everyone must orbit politely around him. Your husband gestures smoothly. "Mr. Thompson, I'd like you to meet my wife." A handshake follows, friendly smiles, perhaps a small compliment about the home. Then comes the next step. "Mr. Thompson, this is Mrs. Reynolds." The boss's wife offers a warm greeting, and you respond with equal enthusiasm. Compliments about coats, travel, or the pleasant weather often appear at this stage, functioning as conversational icebreakers. Now everyone stands in a small cluster for a moment. 4 people, 4 smiles, 4 brains quietly trying to remember everyone's name. This is where things can become delicate, because forgetting a name immediately after hearing it is one of the great silent fears of polite society. Everyone has done it. Everyone hopes. Nobody notices. So the trick is repetition. You casually use the names again. "Mrs. Thompson, please have a seat." "Mr. Thompson, can I get you something to drink?" See? Smooth. Elegant. No one suspects you're repeating the names purely for survival. The introductions continue gently. If other guests are present, they are brought into the circle one at a time, each greeting unfolding like a small performance of courtesy. Handshakes, warm smiles, a brief moment of eye contact that says, "Yes, we are now officially acquaintances." The goal is to create immediate comfort. No one should feel uncertain about where to stand or what to say next. The hostess guides the process quietly, moving the conversation forward like a conductor keeping an orchestra in rhythm. And slowly something interesting begins to happen. The room relaxes. At first, everyone is slightly formal. Voices are careful, movements polite. But after a few introductions, the atmosphere begins to soften. Your husband cracks a small joke. The boss chuckles. His wife asks about the neighbourhood. Soon the conversation spreads naturally around the room like warm air filling a space. And just like that, the awkward beginning has passed. Everyone knows each other. Names have been exchanged. Polite smiles have turned into genuine ones. You watch the scene unfold for a moment. Guests settling into chairs. The boss standing comfortably near the coffee table. Your husband already leaning into a story about something that happened at the office earlier that week. This is exactly what you hoped for. Because a successful introduction does something subtle but powerful. It turns strangers into participants in the same evening. No confusion, no awkward silences, just the gentle rhythm of polite conversation beginning to flow. And as voices rise and laughter begins to appear in the living room, you glance quietly toward the kitchen. Because while the introductions are going beautifully, the roast is still waiting for its moment. No matter what is happening behind the scenes, a hostess must appear calm. The potatoes might be boiling over, and the gravy might be thickening into something resembling glue, but outwardly you remain serene. This is one of the most important rules of the 1950s dinner party. The hostess is not simply the cook. She is the atmosphere. Guests should feel relaxed, welcomed and comfortable the entire evening. They should never suspect that behind the kitchen door a quiet series of culinary negotiations is taking place. Because let's be honest, dinner preparation rarely unfolds with perfect grace. At some point something always tries to misbehave. Perhaps the potatoes start boiling with a sudden enthusiasm usually reserved for volcanic activity. A small foam mountain rises toward the edge of the pot like it has personal ambitions. You rush over, a quick adjustment to the heat, a gentle stir. Crisis averted, but then you glance toward the oven. The roast looks magnificent, but you begin calculating its timing with the focus of someone defusing a complicated device. Too early, and dinner sits awkwardly on the table, while guests politely pretend not to notice. Too late, and everyone sits in the dining room smiling bravely while their stomachs conduct quiet protests. Timing, you realize, is everything. Meanwhile, in the living room, conversation continues. Your husband is telling a story about the office. The boss laughs politely. His wife asks a question about the neighbourhood. You step briefly into the room with the calm smile of someone who definitely has not been whispering urgent instructions to a pot of carrots. Can I refill anyone's drink? Everyone nods appreciatively. The tray appears again. Glasses clink gently. The room feels relaxed and pleasant. This is exactly how it should look, because the illusion of effortlessness is the real goal. You move back toward the kitchen quietly. The moment the door swings closed behind you, the calm smile fades into focused determination. You check the roast again. Still good. Potatoes stirred, carrots simmering peacefully. Now comes the gravy. Gravy has a reputation. It waits patiently for the worst possible moment to develop lumps. Lumps that stare up from the saucepan like tiny culinary accusations. So you whisk carefully, slowly, steadily. The whisk moves with the rhythm of someone who understands the stakes. Because good gravy can save an entire dinner. Bad gravy can make even the finest roast feel slightly embarrassed. You taste it. Not bad. Perhaps a little more salt. Yes, that helps. For a moment, everything's quiet again. The kitchen hums softly. The stove ticks gently with heat. The smell of roast beef fills the air like a reassuring promise that dinner will in fact exist. Then you hear laughter from the living room. Good. That means the guests are comfortable. You smooth your dress again before stepping back into the room. The transformation happens instantly. Calm, hostess, relaxed smile. You join the conversation briefly, nodding along as the boss describes a recent business trip, or perhaps an amusing office mishap involving a faulty typewriter. No one notices that you are quietly checking the clock in your mind. 10 minutes. That's when dinner should happen. Soon the evening will shift from conversation to the dining table. Plates will be served, forks lifted, and the entire performance will move into its next act. But for now, the hostess remains serene. Because that is the rule. The kitchen may be conducting a complicated symphony of boiling pots and roasting meat, but the living room must never know. To the guests, the evening feels effortless, calm, almost magical. And that, more than anything else, is the true skill of the perfect 1950s hostess. The cocktail tray becomes your personal tightrope act. You glide through the room offering drinks, balancing glasses while maintaining pleasant conversation and avoiding small children, dogs, or curious elbows. At first glance, this seems simple. It is, after all, just a tray. But once the glasses are filled, the situation changes dramatically. Because now the tray contains several delicate glass vessels, each holding a small but determined amount of liquid that behaves like it has absolutely no interest in staying inside the glass. You lift the tray carefully, one hand beneath it, the other ready to assist if physics suddenly becomes adventurous. The glasses clink softly as they settle into place. Whiskey sours, highballs, perhaps a martini or two if someone is feeling especially sophisticated this evening. Ice cubes shift quietly. You take your first step into the living room, slowly, gracefully, like someone crossing a room full of invisible tripwires. Cocktail hour is now in full swing. The boss is leaning comfortably in his chair. Your husband is telling another office story that is already becoming slightly more entertaining with the assistance of whiskey. The boss's wife smiles warmly as you approach. "Another drink?" you ask gently. She nods. Now comes the delicate moment of transfer. You tilt the tray slightly forward so the glasses are visible, but not so much that one begins sliding toward the carpet like a determined little ice rink experiment. She takes her glass. Success. One down. Next comes the boss. He selects a highball with the thoughtful seriousness of a man choosing a tool for an important task. "Thank you," he says. You smile politely. "Of course." 2 glasses gone. The tray feels lighter already, which makes it easier to maneuver through the room. But the mission isn't finished. You glance around carefully. This is where situational awareness becomes important, because cocktail trays have natural enemies. First, the curious elbow. Some guests talk with enthusiasm. Their arms move freely through space while they describe fishing trips, office mishaps, or the surprising reliability of a new automobile. Enthusiastic elbow can transform a perfectly stable tray into a brief but memorable waterfall. So you steer gently around conversational gestures. Next comes the household obstacle course. Perhaps there is a small child wandering nearby, curious about the adults and their mysterious glowing beverages, or a family dog, hopeful and optimistic about the possibility of dropped snacks. You glide past them carefully, adjusting your path with the quiet skill of someone navigating a very polite maze. The tray moves through the room again. Your husband takes another drink with cheerful appreciation. "Thanks, dear." You nod. To the guests, this looks effortless. Just a gracious hostess offering drinks. But inside your mind, there is a quiet calculation happening. Balance, distance, angle of the tray, the unpredictable enthusiasm of ice cubes, and still conversation continues. You ask the boss's wife about her garden. She describes her roses with the proud tone of someone who has successfully negotiated with several stubborn plants. The boss begins discussing a recent trip out of town, describing a hotel that apparently served coffee strong enough to wake a sleeping bear. Laughter spreads easily through the room, and slowly the tray empties. Only 1 glass remains. You return to the kitchen with the quiet satisfaction of someone who has completed a surprisingly technical task without public embarrassment. The tray rests on the counter. No spills, no accidents. The living room remains warm and cheerful behind you. Cocktail hour is working exactly as intended. Guests are relaxed. Conversation is flowing. And best of all, the carpet still smells like carpet, not like bourbon, which, in the delicate art of 1950s entertaining, counts as a small but meaningful victory. Certain topics are safe. Weather, vacations, maybe the new car. Others are forbidden territory. Politics, religion, and family drama must be carefully avoided unless you want the evening to end in polite horror. Dinner conversation in the 1950s is not random. It is a carefully managed social ecosystem where certain subjects float gently across the table while others are quietly pushed overboard before they cause trouble. Think of it like navigating a small conversational boat through calm waters. You want smooth sailing, no sudden storms, no heated debates about world affairs while someone is attempting to cut a slice of roast beef. So the safest topic appears almost immediately: the weather. Weather is the universal conversational life raft. It affects everyone, offends no one, and can be discussed indefinitely without risking emotional damage. Beautiful day today, someone says. Yes, lovely sunshine, another agrees. Everyone nods thoughtfully, as if the sky personally consulted them before choosing its schedule. From there, the conversation expands gently. Vacations are another reliable subject. Someone might describe a recent trip to the lake, the mountains, or perhaps a long drive along the coast. These stories are pleasant, descriptive, and completely safe. They involve scenery, mild adventure, and absolutely no political controversy. You listen politely, nodding as someone describes a fishing trip that involved a very large fish and a heroic struggle that lasted approximately 3 minutes. Now we arrive at another dependable topic: automobiles. The 1950s is a golden age of enthusiastic car ownership. New models appear every year with tail fins, chrome details, and colours bright enough to guide airplanes safely to the runway. Someone mentions a new Chevrolet. Another guest describes their Buick. Your husband nods approvingly and offers a small observation about fuel mileage or engine performance, which everyone listens to with polite interest. Cars are excellent conversation material because they combine technology, aspiration, and just enough friendly competition to keep things lively without becoming dangerous. But now we must discuss the forbidden territory: politics. Politics at the dinner table is like opening a mysterious door that may lead directly into an argument. One casual comment about elections or government decisions can suddenly transform the calm atmosphere into something far less relaxing. So politics is avoided. Carefully. If someone begins drifting toward that direction, perhaps mentioning a recent speech or policy, you gently redirect the conversation with the skill of a conversational traffic officer. Speaking of travel, you say smoothly, "Have you visited the new park outside town?" And just like that, the discussion turns away from potential disaster. Religion is another delicate subject. Faith is deeply personal, and dinner parties are not the place for spirited theological debates. No one wants to explain their views on the nature of the universe while passing the mashed potatoes. So religion stays safely outside the dining room. And finally, there is family drama. Every family has stories. An uncle who argues loudly at weddings, a cousin who borrowed money and vanished, a sibling who insists on raising chickens in a suburban backyard. But tonight, those stories remain hidden. Dinner conversation is meant to feel light, pleasant, comfortable. So instead, guests discuss recipes, home projects, and the small victories of everyday life. Someone describes a pie that turned out surprisingly well. The boss's wife mentions a new curtain fabric she found at the store. Your husband recalls a harmless office mishap involving a stubborn filing cabinet. Laughter drifts around the table. Forks move quietly across plates. The roast is carved, potatoes are served, and conversation flows like a gentle current that carries everyone safely through the evening. And that is the true art of dinner table conversation. Not dramatic debates, not shocking revelations, just a steady rhythm of pleasant topics, polite curiosity, and shared laughter. In the world of the 1950s, dinner party, a successful conversation is one where everyone feels comfortable, and no one accidentally starts a political revolution while passing the gravy. Where people sit is not random. The host carefully arranges seating to encourage conversation and prevent awkward silences. It's like playing chess, except every piece is holding a fork. At first glance, a dinner table might seem like a simple arrangement of chairs, but in the 1950s dinner party, seating is strategy. Because where people sit determines how the entire evening unfolds. One poor seating choice can lead to long stretches of polite silence, interrupted only by the gentle clinking of forks and the faint sound of someone reconsidering their life choices. So the host plans ahead. Traditionally, the most important guest, the boss in this case, sits in the seat of honor. Often, this is to the right of the hostess or the host, depending on the style of the gathering. This placement signals respect while also giving the guest a comfortable position within the conversation. Your husband takes the other head of the table. The boss's wife is seated nearby, often next to the host. This arrangement allows conversation to flow naturally across the table, without isolating anyone into a lonely island of mashed potatoes. You step back for a moment before dinner is served and review the arrangement in your mind. Who talks easily? Who tends to be quiet? Who might accidentally start discussing office politics if left unsupervised? These questions guide your choices. You seat talkative people near quieter guests, allowing conversation to spread evenly, like a pleasant breeze through the room. Two extremely quiet people sitting together can create a small conversational black hole where only polite nodding survives. On the other hand, two extremely talkative people seated side by side may create a situation where the rest of the table simply watches in admiration as a single uninterrupted story lasts for 37 minutes. Balance is everything. So the boss sits here, his wife sits there. Your husband remains in a position where he can guide the conversation and occasionally rescue any awkward pauses with a friendly question or a harmless story about work. Once everyone finds their chair, the subtle choreography begins. Napkins unfold, chairs slide gently toward the table, water glasses are lifted, and suddenly the seating plan begins doing its job. The boss turns to speak with the hostess. Your husband chats comfortably with the boss's wife. Across the table, smaller conversations begin to bloom like little islands of discussion. Have you lived in this neighbourhood long? Oh yes, we moved here a few years ago. It's such a quiet street. The structure of the seating keeps everything flowing. No one feels stranded. No one feels ignored. The evening moves forward smoothly, guided quietly by the invisible architecture of the table. Of course, sometimes surprises happen. Perhaps the boss and your husband suddenly launch into a spirited discussion about automobiles, or the boss's wife discovers that you both share a mutual appreciation for gardening, leading to an enthusiastic comparison of rose varieties and stubborn weeds. These moments are welcome. They are the signs that the seating arrangement is working. Guests relax. Conversation grows warmer. Laughter begins appearing between bites of roast beef. From the outside, it all looks perfectly natural, as if people simply wandered into their seats and the conversation magically organized itself. But you know the truth. The chairs were placed deliberately. The conversations guided quietly. The evening balanced with the careful attention of someone arranging pieces on a board. Except instead of kings and queens, you have roast beef, polite laughter, and a table full of guests holding forks. When dinner is ready, it must appear as if everything happened effortlessly. Plates arrive warm, portions look balanced, and no one suspects you nearly dropped the roast 10 minutes earlier. This is the moment when the evening quietly shifts gears. The conversation in the living room has been pleasant. The cocktails have done their job. Everyone feels relaxed and comfortably social. But now it is time for dinner. You glance toward the clock, then toward the kitchen. Timing, as always, is everything. The roast must rest just long enough to stay juicy, but not so long that it becomes suspiciously lukewarm. You rise from your chair with the calm confidence of someone who absolutely did not spend the last 5 minutes whispering encouraging words to a saucepan of gravy. "Well," you say gently, "dinner is ready." The phrase works like a soft bell. Chairs slide back, glasses are set down, and guests stand with polite anticipation. You guide everyone toward the dining room. The table waits exactly as you left it earlier, plates centered, forks aligned, napkins folded with quiet dignity. The flowers sit peacefully, in the middle, still behaving themselves. Guests take their seats according to the carefully planned arrangement. Chairs slide inward again, napkins unfold. And now the real performance begins. You return to the kitchen. The roast waits on the counter like a proud centerpiece of the entire evening. It smells wonderful, filling the kitchen with the warm promise that dinner will indeed be worth the effort. You pick up the carving knife. For a moment there is silence. Carving a roast carries a surprising amount of responsibility. The slices must be neat even, and respectable. Nothing too thin, nothing too thick. Each piece must look like it belongs on a dinner plate rather than a lumberyard. You carve carefully. The knife moves slowly through the roast, revealing perfect slices of tender meat. Each piece is placed onto a serving platter with the quiet pride of someone who knows this roast has behaved exactly as hoped. Next come the potatoes. Mashed potatoes are scooped into a warm bowl, their soft texture forming gentle clouds of buttery goodness. The carrots follow, bright and cheerful, ready to add colour to the plate. Finally, the gravy. You pour it slowly into the gravy boat, watching the smooth brown liquid settle into place without a single lump in sight. Victory. Now you carry the platters into the dining room. This part requires a particular kind of grace. Serving dishes must arrive steadily, placed gently onto the table without dramatic clattering or sudden splashes. The roast is set down first. The room fills with appreciative murmurs. "That smells wonderful." Your husband smiles proudly, as if he personally negotiated with the roast earlier. You begin serving. A slice of roast for the boss, a spoonful of potatoes for his wife, carrots placed neatly beside them. Each plate becomes a small composition, balanced, warm, inviting. Guests thank you as the plates arrive. Forks lift. The first bites are taken. There is always a small pause at this moment. Quiet second when everyone tastes the meal and the hostess waits, outwardly calm but internally holding her breath. Then the boss nods. This is excellent. And just like that, the entire evening relaxes another notch. Conversation resumes. Laughter returns. The table fills with the gentle sounds of dinner being enjoyed. From the outside, everything appears effortless. Guests see a beautiful meal served gracefully at a perfectly set table. What they do not see is the earlier moment in the kitchen when the roast tray slipped slightly and your heart briefly attempted to exit your body. But that is the magic of a well-hosted dinner. The chaos stays hidden. The grace is what everyone remembers. And now, with plates full and conversation flowing again, the dinner party has officially reached its most delicious chapter. If your husband's boss is present, the stakes rise dramatically. Every compliment about the food carries hidden career implications, and every moment of awkward silence feels like a performance review. At a normal dinner, the goal is simple: feed people, enjoy conversation, and make sure no one accidentally drops a fork into their lap. But when the boss is sitting at the table, dinner becomes something slightly more strategic. Not obvious strategy, nothing dramatic. Just a quiet awareness that the man carving into the roast might also be the man deciding whether your husband gets a raise next year. No pressure. You notice it in small ways. When the boss takes his first bite of roast beef, everyone at the table becomes slightly more attentive than usual. Not in a tense way. more like a gentle pause in the rhythm of conversation. Forks hover, glasses rest quietly on the table, and then he nods. This is excellent. The tension dissolves instantly, like a balloon slowly deflating. Your husband smiles a little wider. You thank him warmly while pretending that the compliment was inevitable, not the result of 3 hours of careful preparation and a very intense conversation with the oven earlier. Dinner continues. The boss takes another bite, clearly enjoying himself, and suddenly the entire table feels lighter. Conversation flows again. Someone asks about his recent business trip. He describes a hotel with very small towels and a surprisingly enthusiastic elevator operator. Laughter circles the table, but even as the atmosphere relaxes, the quiet pressure remains. You watch carefully. Is the boss's plate emptying too quickly? That might mean he enjoyed the food or that he was simply hungry. Is he reaching for seconds? That's an excellent sign. You offer more potatoes. Would you like another slice of roast? He nods appreciatively. Just a small one. Another victory. Across the table, your husband joins the conversation with careful enthusiasm. He laughs at the boss's stories, but not too loudly. He contributes to the discussion without dominating it. This is its own delicate dance. A dinner with the boss isn't the place for aggressive storytelling or dramatic opinions. It's a place for friendly charm, light humour, and the occasional thoughtful comment that reminds the boss your husband is both competent and pleasant to be around. Meanwhile, you keep the table moving smoothly. Water glasses are refilled. The gravy boat circulates like a small, important diplomat. Carrots appear wherever plates begin looking suspiciously empty. And slowly something interesting happens. The pressure begins to fade. Because the boss is enjoying himself. He leans back in his chair, relaxed now. The formal distance that existed when he first arrived has softened into something closer to friendly conversation. He compliments the potatoes. His wife asks about the recipe for the roast. You explain it modestly, leaving out the part where you check the oven every 6 minutes like a nervous scientist monitoring an experiment. By the time dessert is mentioned, the mood at the table feels completely comfortable. The boss laughs, again this time a little louder. Your husband looks relieved, and you realise something. The dinner party has quietly succeeded. Not because everything was perfect, although the roast did behave admirably, but because everyone feels at ease. The boss isn't evaluating anything anymore. He's simply enjoying dinner. And in the world of the 1950s dinner party, that's the closest thing to a standing ovation you can get. Guests follow their own etiquette script, praising the meal generously whether the casserole is perfect or slightly mysterious. Compliments float around the table like polite currency. The moment dinner begins, a second performance quietly unfolds. This one belongs to the guests, because good dinner guests in the 1950s understand an important social rule. The cook must be praised, generously, consistently, possibly even a little dramatically. It doesn't matter if the meal is extraordinary or simply respectable. Compliments are part of the ritual, like unfolding the napkin or passing the potatoes. The first one usually arrives quickly. The boss takes another bite of roast beef and nods approvingly. This is wonderful. You smile modestly, of course. A good hostess never accepts praise too eagerly. That would suggest you expected it. Instead, you wave it away gently. Oh, it's just a simple roast. This is a small social lie that everyone understands. Nothing about tonight has been simple, but modesty is part of the choreography. Soon the boss's wife joins in. The potatoes are delicious. You thank her warmly, making a mental note that the potatoes, thankfully, did not turn into paste. Your husband participates as well. Her cooking is always excellent. This earns a polite laugh from the table. Spouses praising one another during dinner parties is a small but charming tradition. It signals harmony, cooperation, and the reassuring idea that the household functions peacefully. even if the roast very nearly slid off the tray earlier. Compliments continue moving around the table. The gravy is lovely. These carrots are perfectly cooked. Someone might even admire the table setting itself. What beautiful flowers! Each compliment is received the same way, with gratitude and a touch of humility. Oh, thank you. I'm so glad you like it. It's an old recipe. This exchange creates a pleasant rhythm. Guests offer praise. The hostess accepts it modestly. The table relaxes further with each small kindness. Of course, occasionally a dish may inspire slightly more cautious praise. Perhaps the gelatin salad. Gelatin, especially in the 1950s, has a way of surprising people. The boss's wife studies the shimmering ring carefully before taking a polite bite. Her expression remains calm and thoughtful as she considers the fruit suspended inside like tiny archaeological discoveries. Then she smiles. How creative! This is the highest form of polite diplomacy. Creative is a versatile compliment. It suggests admiration without committing to detailed analysis. You nod appreciatively. I thought it might be fun. And the conversation moves forward, everyone relieved that the gelatin has not caused a diplomatic incident. The real purpose of these compliments isn't simply to evaluate the food, it's to acknowledge the effort behind the evening. Guests understand that a dinner party requires planning, cooking, cleaning, and careful attention to dozens of tiny details. So the compliments become small tokens of appreciation. Little signals that say, we see the effort, we appreciate the work, and slowly something wonderful happens. The formality of the evening melts away. People lean back in their chairs. Laughter grows easier. The boss begins telling a longer story about a chaotic business trip involving a delayed train and a very stubborn suitcase. Your husband laughs. The boss's wife shares a memory about a disastrous pie she once attempted to bake. Now the table feels warm, comfortable, almost like friends sharing a meal instead of colleagues navigating a careful social occasion. And as the plates slowly empty and the conversation drifts happily across the table, the compliments fade into something even better. Contentment. The quiet satisfaction of a dinner that worked. Where the roast behaved, the guests relaxed, and everyone left the table feeling just a little happier than when they arrived. After dinner, dishes vanish quickly and quietly. The hostess moves with efficient grace, clearing plates without interrupting conversation, or revealing the towering pile forming in the kitchen. Because dinner may feel like the main event, but the work is far from over. In fact, the moment the last bite of the roast beef disappears is when the hostess enters a new phase of the evening, the art of disappearing plates. You notice the signals first. Forks resting on plates, guests leaning back slightly in their chairs, someone gently setting down a napkin. These are the quiet signs. The dinner has reached its natural conclusion. You smile warmly and begin the process. The trick is to move smoothly, almost invisibly, so the table never feels disrupted. Clearing dishes should look less like work and more like a graceful extension of the evening. You reach for the first plate. May I? The boss nods politely, handing it over with a satisfied smile. That was wonderful. You thank him again as you stack the plate carefully in your hands. Then another plate disappears, and another. Soon the table begins slowly transforming. The large dinner plates vanish one by one, leaving only glasses, napkins, and the occasional stray carrot that escaped earlier negotiations. Your husband helps where he can, carrying a couple of plates toward the kitchen with the slightly exaggerated seriousness of someone performing important assistance. Guests remain seated, continuing their conversation. This is exactly the goal. The clearing process should never interrupt the rhythm of the table. Guests keep talking about vacations, home projects, or amusing stories from work while you quietly orbit the table collecting evidence of the meal. Now comes the journey to the kitchen. You step inside and place the plates carefully into the sink. And suddenly, the truth of the situation becomes visible, because what the dining room does not see is the mountain, plates stacked like a small ceramic skyline, serving dishes coated in gravy, utensils resting in gentle chaos. The kitchen, moments ago so calm and organised, now resembles a peaceful battlefield after the main event. But that is a problem for later. For now, the illusion must remain intact. You return to the dining room for another round. Glasses are gathered. Serving bowls disappear. The gravy boat makes its final journey back to the kitchen, still wearing the proud streaks of its earlier success. Each trip is quick and efficient. You move like someone who has practiced this dance many times before, and slowly, almost magically, the table transforms again. Where dinner once sat, space now opens for the next part of the evening. Dessert. Guests continue chatting comfortably while you make the final adjustments. Napkins folded loosely, crumbs brushed away with gentle swipes of a cloth. The table regains its neat appearance as if dinner had simply been a brief and pleasant interruption. Meanwhile, the kitchen quietly accepts its growing pile of dishes. But none of that matters right now, because back in the dining room, the atmosphere remains warm and relaxed. No clattering plates, no visible stress, just the smooth transition from dinner to whatever comes next. And that, more than anything else, is the invisible magic of a well-hosted dinner party. Guests remember the laughter, the food, the conversation. They rarely remember the quiet choreography that made the table transform without a sound. But you know, you carried the plates, you balanced the trays, you kept the evening moving forward without breaking its rhythm. And now, with the table cleared and the room calm again, the night is ready for its sweetest moment. Dessert. Dessert is your final chance to impress. Whether it's a pie, cake, or something flamboyant involving gelatin and whipped cream, it must arrive looking beautiful. Because in the quiet theatre of the 1950s dinner party, dessert is the curtain call. Dinner may have gone wonderfully. The roast behaved. The gravy performed admirably. The boss asked for seconds, which is the culinary equivalent of a standing ovation. But dessert is what everyone remembers. It is the final note of the evening's meal, the last impression before coffee, conversation, and eventually coats and goodbyes. So it must look impressive. You excuse yourself gently from the table. Let me bring dessert. Guests nod approvingly, leaning back in their chairs with the comfortable satisfaction of people who have just finished a good dinner but still feel curious about what comes next. You step into the kitchen. The dishes still sit in their quiet tower beside the sink, but they can wait. Right now, your attention turns to the dessert resting patiently on the counter. Tonight, it's pie. Pie is dependable. Pie has authority. A well-made pie tells guests that this household respects tradition and understands the comforting language of butter, sugar, and fruit. You check it carefully. The crust is golden. The filling has settled beautifully. Nothing has collapsed, exploded, or developed suspicious structural issues. Excellent. You pick up the pie plate and pause for a moment. Because presentation matters, a pie should not simply appear on the table like an unexpected visitor. It should arrive with quiet ceremony. You place it on a serving plate. Perhaps add a small bowl of whipped cream nearby, because whipped cream has the remarkable ability to make almost any dessert feel festive. Now comes the careful walk back to the dining room. Guests look up as you enter, their curiosity rising slightly. Dessert always brings a small wave of excitement, even among the most composed dinner guests. "Oh, that looks wonderful," someone says immediately. You place the pie gently in the centre of the table. For a moment, everyone admires it. This is another quiet ritual of the dinner party. Guests compliment the dessert before it is even sliced. It is part appreciation, part encouragement. Did you make this yourself? You nod modestly. It's just a simple pie. Again, the small social lie. Nothing about pie is simple. Pie involves crusts that behave unpredictably, fillings that threaten to bubble over, and ovens that sometimes develop mysterious temperature personalities. But the modest answer is required. You pick up the knife. Now comes another moment of quiet suspense. Slicing pie is a surprisingly delicate operation. Each piece must be neat and respectable. Too small and guests feel shortchanged. Too large and the plate becomes a dangerous balancing act of crust and filling. You cut the first slice carefully. The crust breaks with a satisfying, delicate crack. The filling holds its shape perfectly. Success. You place the slice onto a plate, adding a small cloud of whipped cream beside it. The first plate goes to the boss. This is tradition. Then his wife, then the others. Soon everyone has a slice. Forks lift. The first bite's taken. And once again, the table pauses for a moment while everyone experiences the final chapter of the meal. Then the boss smiles. This is excellent. Laughter returns. Compliments follow. Someone asks about the recipe. Another guest remarks that pie always reminds them of childhood dinners. The table relaxes again. Coffee will appear soon. Conversation will drift into easy stories and gentle laughter. But for now, the dessert has done its job. It has closed the meal with sweetness, the grand finale of the evening's culinary performance. And as guests enjoy their pie beneath the warm dining room, light, the dinner party settles into its most comfortable rhythm yet. Once dessert is finished, coffee appears, and the evening shifts into a relaxed rhythm. Stories, laughter, and gentle conversation fill the room as everyone slowly unwinds. This is the calmest part of the evening. Dinner has been served. Dessert has arrived safely and behaved exactly as planned. Plates sit empty except for the occasional heroic crumb of pie crust that someone insists on finishing. Now the pace slows. You rise from the table and collect the dessert plates with the same quiet efficiency as before. Guests lean back comfortably in their chairs, the formality of the evening softening with each passing minute. Someone loosens a tie. Someone else laughs a little more freely than earlier. You step into the kitchen to prepare the coffee. Coffee in the 1950s is not optional. It is the final ritual of the dinner party. The gentle signal that the meal has ended but the evening itself is not quite ready to close. The percolator waits patiently on the stove. You fill it with water, measure the grounds carefully and set it to heat. Soon the quiet bubbling begins, that soft rhythmic sound that feels almost like the kitchen breathing slowly. The smell follows quickly, rich, warm and comforting. You arrange the coffee cups on a small tray. Each cup sits on its saucer like a tiny promise of the next stage of the evening. Sugar bowl, cream pitcher, small spoons, everything finds its place. Then you carry the tray back into the dining room. Coffee? Everyone nods. Coffee appears almost magically beside each guest, the dark liquid steaming gently in the cups. Some guests add cream, others stir in sugar. Spoons clink softly against porcelain. And now the real unwinding begins. Dinner conversation tends to stay polite and organised. People sit upright. Topics remain safe and structured. But after coffee, the atmosphere changes. People lean back more comfortably in their chairs. The boss tells a longer story now, something about a train delay during a business trip. Apparently the conductor announced the delay 3 separate times, each announcement contradicting the previous one. Laughter spreads around the table. Your husband adds a story from the office, something harmless about a filing cabinet that refused to cooperate with anyone. The boss's wife shares a memory about a dinner party she once hosted, where the cake collapsed dramatically just before serving. You listen, smiling, occasionally adding a small comment or question that keeps the conversation flowing. The room feels warm, relaxed. The careful formality of earlier has faded into something friendlier. This is the part of the evening where people stop trying quite so hard to impress each other. Now they're simply enjoying the company. Coffee cups are refilled. A few guests wander back toward the living room where the couch cushions still sit politely upright. Lamps glow softly in the corners, creating that quiet, comfortable light that makes conversations feel easier. You join them briefly, sitting down at last after spending much of the evening moving between rooms. For a moment you simply enjoy the scene. The boss looks relaxed now, laughing easily. Your husband seems relieved, his earlier careful enthusiasm replaced with genuine enjoyment. And the conversation continues drifting from topic to topic. Gardens, travel plans, movies someone recently saw. Nothing urgent, nothing stressful. Just the small, pleasant subjects that fill a quiet evening among acquaintances who are slowly becoming friends. The clock ticks gently on the wall. Outside, the street has grown quiet. Inside, coffee cups warm hands while stories continue unfolding in soft waves of laughter. This is the moment when the dinner party feels complete. Not the food, not the table settings, but this simple scene of people talking comfortably long after the meal has ended. And as the conversation drifts through the living room under the soft glow of the lamps, the evening settles into its final peaceful rhythm. Ironically, the person who worked hardest rarely gets to relax. The hostess spends most of the evening moving between kitchen and table, ensuring everyone else enjoys themselves. This is one of the quiet truths of the dinner party. From the outside, it may look as if the hostess is simply part of the conversation, smiling politely and enjoying the company like everyone else. But in reality, she's conducting a small, invisible orchestra. Every detail of the evening moves through her awareness. You sit down for a moment with your coffee, listening to the boss describe a recent road trip that involved a very confusing map and a gas station that apparently sold sandwiches of questionable ambition. Everyone laughs. You laugh too. But even while laughing, your mind performs a quick inventory. Are the coffee cups still full? Does anyone need more cream? Did someone finish their dessert plate? It's not stress exactly, more like quiet attentiveness. The hostess develops a sort of sixth sense for the rhythm of the room. When a conversation slows, you gently ask a question that nudges it forward. When someone's glass empties, you notice. When the coffee pot runs low, you quietly slip back into the kitchen to refill it. Back and forth. Kitchen to living room to dining room back to the kitchen again. You move so smoothly that most guests hardly notice. To them, the evening feels effortless, as if the house itself is quietly providing everything they need. But behind that calm appearance is constant motion. In the kitchen, you rinse a few plates quickly so they don't stack too high in the sink. The coffee pot bubbles softly on the stove, ready for another round. You glance through the doorway at the living room. The boss sits comfortably in the armchair now, leaning forward as he tells another story. Your husband is listening attentively, nodding, along in the relaxed way people do when the evening has gone well. Good, that's the goal. You return to the living room carrying the coffee pot. Anyone for a refill? Hands lift slightly. Cups move forward. You pour carefully, the rich smell of coffee filling the room again. For a moment, you sit down. Just for a minute. You take a small sip of your own coffee and let the conversation wash over you. The lamps cast a warm glow across the room, and the quiet hum of laughter makes the house feel alive. But the pause doesn't last long. Someone finishes their cup. Another guest asks where the restroom is. Your husband catches your eye with a silent question about whether dessert plates should be cleared now or later. The hostess rises again. Not because anyone demanded it, simply because she notices. And that is the real work of the evening. Not cooking, not cleaning, but watching the rhythm of the gathering and gently guiding it forward. Guests feel comfortable, conversation flows easily. Everything appears to happen at just the right moment. And yet, when the evening ends, you may realize something slightly amusing. You barely sat down at all. While everyone else enjoyed a long, relaxing dinner, you spent the night quietly orbiting the room like a very polite satellite. But that's the secret of hosting. The hostess is the quiet engine of the evening, always moving, always watching, making sure the night unfolds smoothly even if she experiences most of it while standing. Once the front door closes and the car headlights disappear down the street, the kitchen finally reveals the aftermath. Dishes, glasses, crumbs, and the quiet satisfaction of survival. For the first time all evening, the house is quiet. The polite laughter has faded. The living room chairs are slightly out of place. Somewhere in the distance, the boss's car rolls slowly down the street before disappearing around the corner. You stand for a moment near the door after the final goodbye. Well, that was lovely. We must do this again sometime. Thank you for such a wonderful evening. These are the closing lines of the dinner party script. Everyone smiles warmly, coats are gathered, and the night air rushes in briefly as the door opens and closes, then silence. The performance is over. You turn toward the kitchen, and that's when the truth of the evening becomes visible, because the kitchen has been waiting patiently all night to reveal what actually happened. The counter holds a quiet parade of used serving dishes. The sink contains a stack of plates that has grown into something resembling a ceramic skyline. Glasses stand in small clusters like survivors of a long and complicated journey. The gravy boat sits proudly in the centre of it all, still wearing the evidence of its earlier success. You lean against the counter for a moment, not exhausted exactly, more like pleasantly drained. Because hosting a dinner party is a curious mix of effort and reward. For hours you move through the house managing dozens of tiny details, timing the roast, refilling glasses, guiding conversations, clearing plates. Now all that motion has stopped. The kitchen hums quietly. You roll up your sleeves. The dishes will not wash themselves. First, the plates. They clink gently as you stack them beside the sink. A quick rinse removes the last traces of gravy and mashed potatoes. Next come the glasses. You wash them carefully, watching the soap bubbles swirl in the warm water. The evening replays in your mind as you work. The boss complimenting the roast, his wife asking about the pie, your husband laughing a little too loudly at a story but somehow making it charming. Small moments, small victories. You dry the plates and place them back into the cabinet one by one. Meanwhile, the house slowly returns to its ordinary shape. The living room still glows softly under the lamps, though now the conversation has faded into memory. The dining room table sits quiet again, the flowers in the centre looking slightly tired after their long evening of polite observation. You wipe the counters, sweep a few crumbs from the floor. Even the refrigerator hum seems quieter now, like the house itself is relaxing after a busy performance. Eventually the last dish is washed. The sink is empty. The kitchen looks almost exactly as it did before the evening began. Almost. Because there's one difference now. That quiet feeling of accomplishment. You hosted. You cooked. You managed the entire evening without disaster. The roast behaved. The pie survived. No drinks were spilled on the carpet. In the world of the 1950s dinner party, that counts as a complete success. You turn off the kitchen light and pause for a moment before leaving the room. Outside, the neighbourhood is calm. The houses are dark. Somewhere down the street, another family is probably finishing their own quiet evening. Inside your house, everything has returned to normal. The dishes are clean. The guests are gone. And the kitchen, once the centre of the evening's quiet chaos, now rests peacefully again. The evening ends with a quiet discussion between you and your husband. Did the boss enjoy the roast? Did the jokes land? Did the evening help his chances at that promotion? This conversation always happens. It doesn't matter how smoothly the evening went or how relaxed everyone seemed. Once the guests have gone and the kitchen has returned to its peaceful state, the two of you inevitably sit down and replay the night like detectives examining a complicated case. Usually it begins in the living room. The lamps are still on, casting that soft golden glow across the furniture. The couch cushions, which worked so hard to remain upright all evening, are finally allowed to relax a little as your husband sinks into his chair. You sit down beside him with a tired but satisfied sigh. For the first time all night, neither of you is performing. Now the analysis begins. So, your husband says, leaning back slightly, "I think that went well." You nod thoughtfully. "Yes, I think it did." But a proper debrief requires details. First comes the food report. "The boss seemed to like the roast," your husband says. You think back carefully. The moment he asked for a second slice returns to mind. "Yes," you reply. "He definitely enjoyed it." In the world of dinner parties, seconds are extremely important. They are the closest thing to a written review you're likely to receive. Next comes the gravy evaluation. Your husband tilts his head slightly. "That gravy was excellent." You smile modestly, though inside you remember the 5 minutes earlier in the evening when the gravy threatened to turn into something resembling wool paste. "Well," you say calmly, "I'm glad it worked out." Then the conversation shifts to the social performance. Your husband thinks for a moment. "Do you think my story about the office made sense?" You laugh softly. "Yes, it did." The boss laughed. "That's another good sign." Laughter from the boss carries a special weight during evenings like this. It means the atmosphere was relaxed. It means no one felt uncomfortable. It means the evening succeeded at its most important job, making the boss feel welcome. Your husband nods thoughtfully. "I hope I didn't talk too much." "That's impossible," you say gently. "You barely finished half your stories." He smiles at that. Then comes the final question, the quiet one that sits underneath the entire evening. "Do you think it helped?" he asks. You know exactly what he means. Did the dinner make a good impression? Did the boss feel comfortable? Did tonight quietly strengthen your husband's position at the office? You think back through the evening again. The compliments about the roast, the easy laughter during coffee, the boss leaning back in his chair telling stories instead of watching the clock. "Yes," you say, finally. "I think it did." Your husband exhales slowly, the tension of the evening finally releasing. "That's good." For a moment neither of you speaks. The house is quiet now. The clock ticks softly on the wall. Outside, the streetlights cast gentle pools of light across the empty road. Then your husband chuckles. "You know," he says, "I was worried about that gelatin thing." You laugh too. Me too. Because behind all the etiquette and careful planning, that's the truth of the dinner party. It's never perfect. There are always small moments of uncertainty, tiny crises in the kitchen, nervous glances at the clock, brief doubts about whether the roast will cooperate. But somehow it all comes together. Guests laugh. The boss enjoys the meal. The house fills with conversation and warmth. And by the end of the night, you're both sitting quietly in the living room, smiling at the simple fact that it worked. The dinner party is over. The dishes are done. And the evening, carefully planned, carefully served, carefully navigated, has officially survived. Dinner parties aren't isolated events. They're part of a social web where neighbours observe, gossip, and quietly compare one another's hosting skills. In a 1950s suburb, houses may look identical from the outside. Neat lawns, tidy sidewalks, maybe a bicycle leaning against the garage. But socially, each home develops a reputation, and dinner parties are part of how that reputation forms. You might not think about it during the evening itself. After all, you're busy timing the roast and making sure the gravy doesn't turn into something that requires architectural permits. But quietly, over time, neighbours notice things. They notice who hosts often. They notice whose table settings always look elegant. And they certainly notice whose casserole once contained a surprising amount of pineapple. None of this is cruel exactly. It's more like a gentle neighbourhood sport. Mrs. Reynolds down the street might mention to someone at the grocery store they hosted Mr. Thompson last Thursday. Lovely. Dinner. Another neighbour might nod thoughtfully. Oh yes, she's quite the cook. These small observations travel surprisingly far, not in a scandalous way, more like a quiet current running through the community. Hosting well becomes part of your household's identity. The house with the beautiful roses, the house where the children ride their bicycles after school, and the house that hosts a very respectable dinner party. Of course, this also means everyone notices when something goes slightly wrong. Perhaps someone once served a cake that leaned dramatically to one side like a small architectural emergency, or a gelatin mould that refused to leave its pan and had to be presented with heroic optimism. Stories like these float around the neighbourhood with gentle amusement, not cruel laughter, just the quiet understanding that everyone hosting a dinner party is walking a delicate line between elegance and chaos. You participate in this system too, of course. When you attend someone else's dinner party, you notice things, the tablecloth, the food, the small details that make the evening feel comfortable or slightly tense. But mostly, you appreciate the effort, because now you understand exactly how much work goes into hosting. 3 hours of preparation, careful planning, and at least one moment in the kitchen where you stare at the oven and whisper, "Please cooperate." Over time, the neighbourhood develops a sort of informal rhythm. One family hosts this month, another host next. Invitations travel quietly from house to house like polite little ambassadors. Each gathering adds another layer to the social map of the community. Who tells the best stories? Who makes the best pie? Who owns the slightly mysterious gelatin mould shaped like a fish? None of it is officially recorded anywhere, but everyone knows. And tonight, whether anyone says it out loud or not, your household has added a small victory to that quiet neighbourhood record. The boss enjoyed the roast. The pie behaved itself. The evening unfolded smoothly. Tomorrow someone might mention it casually. Dinner at their house was lovely. And that simple sentence will travel gently through the neighbourhood like a warm breeze. Not loud, not dramatic. Just one more small piece of the quiet reputation game that connects every house on the street. In a time when careers, friendships, and social status often revolved around home life, these dinners carried more weight than they seemed. Today it might seem unusual that a simple meal in someone's dining room could matter so much. But in the 1950s, the home was more than just a place to sleep and store furniture. It was a kind of social headquarters. It was where friendships formed, alliances strengthened, and reputations quietly grew. The dinner table was part of that system. When people gathered for dinner, they weren't just sharing food. They were building relationships in a way that felt personal and meaningful. Think about it for a moment. There were no video calls, no quick text messages to maintain casual friendships. Social media didn't exist, and office relationships often stayed within the office walls. So when people wanted to connect outside of work, they invited one another into their homes. Dinner became the bridge between professional life and personal life. Your husband might spend all day in the office working with the boss, discussing numbers, projects, or schedules. But around the dinner table, those same people could talk about vacations, hobbies, or the challenges of raising children. The formal structure of work softened into something more human, and that mattered, because people often trust the people they know personally. A boss who enjoys an evening at your table might see your husband differently the next morning at the office. Not just as an employee, but as someone whose family he's met, whose home he's visited, whose roast beef he's enjoyed. It's a subtle shift. But subtle shifts can change careers. Dinner parties also played a role in friendships. Neighbourhoods in the 1950s were tight communities. People lived close together, shared schools, parks and grocery stores. Hosting dinner gave neighbours a chance to strengthen those connections. An invitation meant trust. It meant someone was opening their home to you, offering food, conversation, and an evening of companionship. That simple act carried meaning. Even the small details mattered. A carefully set table showed respect for guests. A thoughtful menu showed effort and care. The time spent preparing everything signalled something important. You mattered enough for someone to plan an entire evening around your visit. And guests returned that respect in their own way, by complimenting the meal, by engaging in conversation, by bringing warmth and laughter into the home. In many ways, the dinner party was a shared performance of kindness and hospitality. Everyone had a role. The hostess organised the evening. The host guided the conversation. Guests participated with good humour and appreciation. Together they created something simple but powerful, a space where people could relax and enjoy one another's company. Of course, the process wasn't always easy. There were recipes that misbehaved, timing that went slightly wrong, and moments when the hostess wondered if the roast would ever finish cooking. But those small struggles were part of the story, because at the end of the evening what people remembered wasn't the exact texture of the mashed potatoes or the precise placement of the forks. They remembered the feeling, the warmth of the room, the laughter around the table, the quiet satisfaction of a meal shared among friends. And that's why dinner parties mattered so much in the 1950s, not because they were perfect, but because they brought people together in a world that moved a little slower, where an evening around the table could quietly shape friendships, careers, and communities. By the time the house grows quiet and the last dish is washed, you realise something remarkable. You hosted an entire evening that appeared effortless. And in the world of the 1950s hostess, that was the real achievement. The house is calm now. The dining room chairs are pushed neatly back beneath the table. The flowers in the centrepiece lean slightly to one side, tired after their long evening of quiet observation. The kitchen counters are wiped clean, and the last dish sits drying beside the sink. For the first time all day, nothing needs your attention. No roast to check, no potatoes to stir, no tray of glasses wobbling dangerously across the living room carpet. Just quiet. You walk slowly through the house, turning off lights one by one. The living room looks exactly the way it did before the guests arrived, as if the entire evening had simply been a pleasant dream. But you know better. Because behind that calm appearance was an entire afternoon of work. Planning the menu, polishing the table, arranging the seating like a careful chess match where everyone would feel comfortable. And then the cooking, the roast that required constant supervision, the gravy that demanded your full attention, the pie that needed to emerge from the oven looking dignified instead of dramatic. All of it happened quietly behind the scenes, while the guests experienced a completely different version of the evening. They saw the finished performance, the warm house, the relaxed conversation, the hostess who seemed calm, welcoming, and entirely in control. They didn't see the earlier moment when you stood in the kitchen staring at the oven and calculating the precise moment when everything would be ready. They didn't see the small sprint between rooms while balancing trays and checking the clock. That was the invisible work of the evening, and somehow it worked. The boss laughed, his wife complimented the pie, your husband told his stories without accidentally knocking over a glass of water. The conversation flowed easily, moving from one subject to another like a gentle current carrying the evening forward. You pause for a moment in the hallway and look toward the dining room again. There's a small sense of pride there. Not loud pride, Not the kind that demands attention, just a quiet satisfaction. Because hosting in the 1950s was never about dramatic achievements. It was about creating an atmosphere, a space where people could relax, a place where work relationships softened into friendships, where neighbours shared stories, and where laughter filled the room long after dinner plates were cleared away. And tonight, that happened. The evening felt easy, natural, almost effortless, which ironically means you did everything exactly right. Because the greatest compliment a hostess could receive was not applause or admiration. It was something much simpler. Guests leaving the house smiling and saying, "What a lovely evening." You reach the final light switch in the kitchen. The room goes dark except for the soft glow of the refrigerator light through the crack of its door. The house is finally resting. The dinner party is finished. And somewhere down the quiet street, the boss is probably telling his wife that the roast was excellent. You head upstairs, knowing that tomorrow the house will return to its ordinary rhythm of chores and errands. But tonight, for just a moment, you can enjoy the quiet pride of something beautifully simple, an evening well hosted, an invisible performance completed perfectly, and a house that, for a few hours, became the warm centre of the world. About 30 minutes before the guests arrive, a very specific form of panic begins to bloom in your chest. Everything looks perfect except suddenly nothing does. You notice a fingerprint on the glass cabinet. One napkin fold looks slightly crooked. The roast smells wonderful, but what if it's secretly dry inside? You circle the house, making tiny last-minute adjustments like a domestic detective hunting invisible crimes. This moment arrives in nearly every dinner party. It doesn't matter how carefully you planned the afternoon. It doesn't matter how early you started preparing the meal or how thoroughly you cleaned the house. About half an hour before the doorbell rings, your brain begins noticing things. Tiny things. Very tiny things. You stand in the dining room and stare at the table. The plates are centered, the forks are aligned, the napkins are folded neatly, and yet one napkin suddenly looks suspicious. You lean closer. Is it crooked? You adjust it slightly. Step back. Now it looks perfect. But wait. Now the fork beside it seems slightly out of line. You fix that too. This process continues quietly around the table like a slow, methodical inspection. Next, the living room. The couch cushions appear perfectly upright, but one of them looks just slightly less enthusiastic than the others. You fluff it again, giving it a gentle pat like a coach encouraging a tired player. Better. You straighten a magazine on the coffee table. Then you notice a faint smudge on the glass cabinet. The smudge could be invisible to every guest who enters the house tonight. But now that you've seen it, it feels enormous. You wipe it away immediately. The house now looks identical to how it looked 2 minutes ago, but somehow you feel better. Then comes the kitchen check. You open the oven carefully. The roast sits inside, quietly roasting like a proud centerpiece of the entire evening. The smell fills the kitchen with warm confidence. You lean down and inspect it like a scientist examining a delicate experiment. It looks perfect. But your mind whispers a troubling thought. What if it only looks perfect? What if the inside is dry? What if the boss cuts into it later and everyone politely chews while pretending it isn't slightly disappointing? You close the oven slowly, deciding that opening it again would probably make things worse. Instead, you turn your attention to the counters. Everything is clean, dish towels folded, vegetables waiting patiently. The gelatin creation sits in the refrigerator, wobbling gently with quiet pride. You open the fridge door just long enough to confirm it still exists. Good. Still there. Now you check the clock. 25 minutes. That's when the pacing begins. You move through the house again, performing a second round of inspections that look suspiciously similar to the first. Napkins adjusted. Chairs nudged slightly closer to the table. A quick glance at the hallway mirror. Hair still behaving. Good. The strange thing about this moment is that the house really is ready. The cleaning is finished. The food is under control. The table is beautiful. But your mind keeps searching for problems the way a detective searches for clues. Is the lighting too bright? Should the flowers be moved slightly? Is the living room rug perfectly straight? You adjust the rug. Step back. Yes, now it's definitely straight. Then the quiet realization arrives. There is nothing left to fix. The house stands calmly around you, prepared and waiting. The roast cooks patiently. The table glows under the dining room light. All that remains is the arrival of the guests. You take a deep breath. For a moment, the house is perfectly still. Then, right on schedule, the doorbell rings. One of the quiet nightmares of a 1950s dinner party is the possibility that someone might still be hungry. Hospitality manuals insist that a good hostess always prepares slightly more food than necessary. Not enough to look wasteful, of course, but enough that no guest ever wonders if they should politely stop eating to save the last piece for someone else. This rule exists for a simple reason. Nothing creates awkwardness at a dinner table faster than the slow realization that the food might be limited. You can almost picture the scene. Someone takes the second to last slice of roast. Everyone notices. Forks pause politely in mid-air while guests silently calculate whether they should reach for the final piece or sacrifice their appetite for the good of the group. This is precisely the situation a careful hostess must avoid. So during the planning stage earlier in the day, you made sure there would be enough. Actually, slightly more than enough. The roast was chosen carefully, large enough to provide generous portions while still leaving a few slices quietly waiting on the platter. Potatoes were mashed in a quantity that could comfortably feed a small family of lumberjacks if necessary. Carrots filled the serving bowl brightly, cheerful little orange soldiers ready for duty. Even the pie was chosen with this rule in mind, because dessert must never feel scarce. Scarce dessert is a tragedy. But abundance requires balance. Too little food creates anxiety. Too much food creates suspicion. Guests might begin wondering if you accidentally prepared dinner for 12 people instead of 4. So the trick lies in the middle, just enough extra to create comfort. You watch for the signals as dinner unfolds. The boss finishes his first slice of roast. You ask politely, "Would you care for another?" If he says yes, and tonight he does, you feel a small wave of relief. The platter still holds several slices waiting patiently, meaning the evening remains safely within the acceptable zone of abundance. Potatoes circulate around the table. Guests scoop another spoonful without hesitation, which is always a good sign. Hesitation around serving bowls suggests people are rationing food. Tonight, however, the bowls move easily. Carrots pass from hand to hand. The gravy boat travels its slow, dignified path across the table. Everything feels comfortable. That's the goal. Guests should never wonder whether they're taking too much. Instead, they relax. They eat naturally. They ask for seconds without feeling guilty. And slowly, something wonderful happens. The conversation grows warmer. Because when people are comfortable with their food, they become comfortable with everything else. No one worries about being polite to the point of hunger. No one stares longingly at the serving dish while pretending to be satisfied. Instead, they enjoy themselves. You notice it in the small details. The boss leans back in his chair after finishing his second slice of roast. Your husband reaches for another spoonful of potatoes. Someone jokes about needing a longer walk tomorrow after such a generous meal. These are the sounds of success. A well-fed table is a relaxed table. Eventually the plates begin emptying. Guests slow their pace naturally, not because food is running out, but because they're satisfied. That is the perfect ending to dinner. No one hungry, no one uncomfortable, Just the quiet feeling of contentment that follows a good meal shared among pleasant company, and as the final plates are cleared and dessert begins to appear, you glance briefly at the roast platter. A few slices remain, exactly as planned, enough to show generosity, not enough to suggest a catering accident. In the careful mathematics of a 1950s dinner party, this is the perfect equation. If you have children, tonight they must perform a very specific role: polite ghosts. They may appear briefly to say hello, offer a small greeting, and then quietly vanish to another room, while the adults conduct their important evening rituals involving cocktails and conversations about office life. This arrangement is not cruel. It is simply tradition. Dinner parties in the 1950s operate according to a certain rhythm, and children, wonderful as they are, can sometimes introduce a slightly unpredictable element into that rhythm. For example, a small child may suddenly decide that the boss's briefcase looks fascinating, or they might ask a perfectly innocent question like, "Why does Mr. Thompson talk so loud?" Questions like this are charming in theory, but in the middle of cocktail hour they can cause entire conversations to freeze like a record skipping on the radio. So the evening begins with a short appearance. Just before the guests arrive, the children are prepared carefully, hair brushed, shirts tucked in, instructions delivered with quiet seriousness. "Come down when I call you," you explain. They nod solemnly, understanding that tonight is a special adult occasion. The doorbell rings, guests arrive, coats are hung, greetings exchanged. The living room fills with the polite warmth of conversation. Then comes the brief introduction. You call gently up the stairs, "Children, come say hello." They appear carefully, descending the stairs with the cautious dignity of diplomats entering an international meeting. You introduce them politely. "Mr. Thompson, Mrs. Thompson, these are our children." The children smile, perhaps shake hands if they're old enough to understand the importance of handshakes. "Hello, nice to meet you." The boss smiles warmly, his wife compliments their manners. This moment lasts about 30 seconds. Then comes the most important instruction of the evening. "Now run along," and just like that, the children disappear. Up the stairs, into the den, maybe to a bedroom where a board game, a comic book, or a radio quietly waits for them. From this point forward, they exist in a strange parallel universe within the same house. They are nearby but unseen. Occasionally faint sounds drift down from upstairs. A muffled laugh, the quiet thump of someone moving across the floor. But the adults remain in their carefully arranged world of cocktails, polite stories, and professional conversation. Every once in a while, a child may briefly appear in the hallway like a curious woodland creature, perhaps to ask an urgent question. "Can we have ice cream?" You answer gently but firmly, "Later." They vanish again, satisfied for the moment. This arrangement benefits everyone. The children enjoy their own evening, free from the long conversations about office travel and new automobile models. The adults enjoy their gathering without worrying that someone might suddenly announce a deeply personal observation about mashed potatoes. And occasionally later in the evening, when dessert is finished and coffee cups sit quietly on the table, the children may make one more appearance, sleepy now, hair slightly messy. They wander into the living room, greeted with smiles from the guests. "Well, hello again." The boss chuckles softly. Someone remarks how polite they were earlier. The children nod sleepily before heading back upstairs. And the dinner party continues, because in the delicate choreography of the 1950s dinner party, even the youngest members of the household understand their role. Appear briefly, smile politely, then vanish like extremely well-mannered ghosts. Although everyone smiles warmly, there is often a silent comparison happening between households. Who sets the most elegant table? Who makes the fluffiest rolls? Who owns the most impressive serving dishes? None of this is openly discussed, of course. The competition exists entirely beneath the surface, disguised as compliments and cheerful conversation. This is one of the quieter realities of mid-century entertaining. No one would ever say it out loud. That would be terribly impolite. But every hostess in the neighbourhood knows the game exists. It begins the moment a guest walks through the door. Not with judgment exactly, more like gentle observation. The tablecloth is noticed, the flowers are admired. The arrangement of plates and glasses receives a quick, subtle scan from experienced eyes that have set many tables themselves. "Your table looks beautiful," someone says, and the compliment is genuine. But somewhere behind that smile is also a small mental note. Interesting napkin fold. Very elegant serving bowl. I wonder where she found that. The competition is not hostile. It's more like a shared hobby that everyone participates in quietly. One hostess may become known for her desserts, another for her remarkable ability to produce warm dinner rolls that appear soft enough to float gently across the table. Someone else may own a collection of serving dishes that seem to multiply mysteriously every time guests visit. And slowly each household develops its own reputation. The house with the beautiful china, the house where the roast is always perfect, the house with the slightly daring gelatin creations that everyone politely calls creative. Guests notice these things, they admire them, and occasionally they borrow ideas. Perhaps after attending your dinner party, Mrs. Reynolds goes home and decides to try folding her napkins in the same elegant triangle shape she saw tonight. Not copying exactly, just inspired. Next time you visit her house, you might notice a similar fold waiting beside your plate. You smile when you see it. The game continues. Serving dishes are another quiet battlefield. Tonight you place the roast on a large porcelain platter that belonged to your mother. Its smooth white surface makes the roast look especially dignified under the dining room lights. The boss's wife notices it immediately. "What a lovely platter," she says. You thank her modestly. "Oh, it's an old one." But now she's thinking about it. Next time she hosts a dinner, she might bring out her own special serving piece. Perhaps a crystal bowl or a silver gravy boat that shines like a tiny lighthouse on the table. And the cycle continues. But the most fascinating part of this competition is how carefully it hides itself. No one ever criticizes. No one declares a winner. Instead, everything is wrapped in compliments. "The meal was wonderful. What beautiful flowers. I must ask for your recipe." Each sentence carries warmth, admiration, and a quiet understanding. We're all trying our best, because in the end the competition isn't really about winning, it's about effort. Each hostess wants to create something special, a welcoming table, a memorable meal, an evening where guests feel comfortable and appreciated, so everyone watches, learns, and improves a little each time. The table becomes more elegant, the recipes become more confident, the serving dishes slowly multiply. And beneath the polite smiles and cheerful conversation, the subtle competition continues. Not fierce, not unkind. Just a quiet, friendly push that makes every dinner party a little more beautiful than the last. And when the evening finally winds down, when coats are gathered and guests step into the cool night air, a wave of quiet relief settles over the house. The dinner worked. No disasters occurred. The roast behaved itself, the conversation flowed, and the boss laughed at least twice. In the world of the 1950s dinner party, that counts as a resounding success. The end of the evening arrives, gradually. No one suddenly stands and announces that the night is finished. Instead, the energy of the room slowly softens, like a song reaching its final notes. Coffee cups sit empty. Stories grow shorter. Someone glances politely at the clock and says the sentence that gently signals the beginning of departure. "Well, we should probably be heading home. This is the cue." Chairs shift, Jackets are remembered. The living room, which spent the evening full of voices and laughter, begins returning to its quiet shape. You stand near the front door while coats are gathered from the hallway rack. "Thank you again for such a lovely dinner," the boss's wife says warmly. You smile. "We're so glad you could come." The boss shakes your husband's hand again, lingering for a moment, as people often do when an evening has gone particularly well. "That roast was excellent," he says. Your husband nods modestly, though everyone knows exactly who deserves the credit. The door opens, cool night air slips into the house for a moment, carrying the faint scent of evening grass and distant streetlights warming the pavement. Your guests step outside. There are a few final goodbyes on the porch, the kind where everyone says farewell 3 separate times before actually leaving. "Well, good night, drive safely, we'll have you over again soon." Then the car doors close. Headlights glow softly for a moment before the car pulls away down the quiet suburban street. You stand at the door for a second longer, watching the red taillights fade into the distance, and then you close it. The house becomes still. Just like that, the entire dinner party, hours of preparation, cooking, conversation, and careful hosting has concluded. You turn back toward the living room. The lamp still glows softly. A chair sits slightly out of place. Someone's laughter seems to echo faintly in the quiet air, like a memory lingering for a moment before disappearing. Your husband exhales slowly. "Well," he says, "that went well?" You nod, because it did. The roast cooked perfectly. No drinks were spilled. The gelatin behaved with admirable dignity, and the boss laughed not once, but at least twice, possibly 3 times if you count the story about the train delay. In the careful mathematics of the 1950s dinner party, these details matter. A successful evening is not measured by grand applause or dramatic praise. It's measured in small signals, guests staying longer than expected, second helpings of roast, easy laughter around the coffee cups, and finally, the quiet warmth of guests leaving the house smiling. You walk slowly through the rooms, turning off the lamps one by one. The house returns to its peaceful nighttime rhythm. Tomorrow the dining room will simply be a dining room again. The living room will host ordinary afternoons instead of carefully managed conversations. But tonight, something special happened here. A handful of people gathered, food was shared, stories were told, and, for a few hours, this ordinary house became the centre of a warm, carefully orchestrated evening. You pause at the kitchen doorway for one last look. Then you switch off the light. The dinner party is over, and by every quiet measure that mattered in 1955, it was a complete success. And now the evening is finally over. The front door has closed. The polite laughter has faded down the quiet suburban street. Somewhere in the distance, a car engine hums softly before disappearing into the night. Inside the house, the living room is calm again. The chairs are slightly out of place. A few empty glasses sit quietly on the coffee table like tiny monuments to the evening's effort. And in the kitchen, well, the kitchen looks like it just survived a small culinary hurricane. But you made it. You survived the planning, the polishing, the cooking, the smiling, the careful balancing of trays and conversations and expectations. The roast came out just right, the guests laughed. No one spilled anything on the carpet. And most importantly, the boss seemed impressed. For a moment the house grows quiet, the kind of quiet that only arrives after a long day of work and worry. You loosen your shoulders a little. Maybe you kick off your shoes. Maybe you lean against the kitchen counter for a moment, listening to the soft hum of the refrigerator and the ticking clock on the wall. Because dinner parties in the 1950s weren't just meals, they were performances, entire evenings built from careful preparation, unwritten rules, and a quiet determination to make everything look effortless. And millions of women across the country did exactly that, night after night. They hosted neighbours, co-workers, bosses, relatives, all while managing homes, raising children, cooking full meals from scratch, and keeping the illusion that none of it required superhuman effort. It's easy to look back now and smile at the jello moulds, the cocktail trays, and the careful etiquette books that told everyone exactly which fork to use. But beneath all that polite formality was something very human. People gathering together, sharing food, laughing about work, talking about their children, celebrating small victories in ordinary living rooms across quiet neighbourhoods. History is full of kings and battles and famous names, but most of it, the real everyday history, looked more like this. A table set carefully for guests, a pot roast slowly roasting in the oven, a hostess hoping everything goes well. So tonight, as you settle into your comfortable bed, maybe take a quiet second to appreciate the little luxuries of modern life. The dishwasher that handles the dishes, the grocery store that sells dinner ready-made if you want it, the freedom to invite friends over and serve pizza if that's what everyone feels like. Because not so long ago, hosting dinner meant something much bigger. It meant hours of preparation, quiet nerves, and the hope that the evening would unfold just right. And somehow, despite the pressure and the expectations, it usually did. The house grew quiet, the dishes were eventually washed, the lights slowly dimmed, and tomorrow morning the neighbourhood would wake up again ready for another perfectly ordinary day. So tonight, rest easy. The dinner party's over, the house is quiet, and history for one peaceful moment is finally asleep.